Folks, welcome back to the KojoMain YouTube channel, where today I'm reporting to you live, or not so live, from right in the middle of one of the hottest altered events going on right now, because my colleague Ellio, fellow altered YouTuber and therefore my sworn rival, made the grave mistake to invite me to the first ever altered rotisserie draft. Never heard of a rotisserie draft? I hadn't either. So as you may know, in a normal draft, you open a booster pack, you pick one card, and then you pass the rest of the pack to the person on your right, while you receive from the person on your left their pack minus the one card they picked out of it. And then you look at the pack, you pick one card, you pass it to your right, and that process continues for 4 whole booster packs until you've collected roughly 50 cards, out of which you build a 30-card draft deck. Now, in a rotisserie draft, things are a bit different. There are no packs. Instead, the person whose turn it is can simply name any card, and then that card goes into their deck, and it's the next person's turn. Every card can only be drafted once, so if somebody else already snatched the Spindle Muna Bastion in the rare Muna version, you'll have to settle for the common version, or maybe the Bravos Out of Faction version, and if they're all taken, you're out of luck. Your deck has to follow normal altered limited deck building rules. That means 30 cards, or 29 plus 1 hero, up to 3 colors, 3 factions. But there's an important catch. You only draft 30 cards in this rotisserie format, not 40 or 50 like in a normal draft. Every card you pick will be in your deck. You can't cut anything, which is the reason why as soon as you've picked a hero, you can't pick a second hero. And as soon as you've picked 3 colors, you can't pick a 4th one. Now, the pick order follows a snake system. So with 8 players, player 1 will have the first pick, after which it goes on in sequence up to player 8, and then the second round will start with player 8 and go back to player 1, and then zigzag back and forth. So your seat in the pick order is actually pretty impactful to your strategy. Now, in this video, I'll talk about my preparation for this draft. I'll talk about who the players are and how the draft went pick by pick, because for this kind of draft format, even just going over the initial planning and strategizing easily fills a whole video, and it's fascinating. And then the games themselves, I will try to cover in a separate video later on. Of course, shout out to Ellio and the lads for making this event happen. It was an absolute blast and a privilege to play in it. And now, without further ado, let's dive in. So how does one go about drafting in this very unusual format? The most important thing is what seat we're in. These were randomly assigned, of course, via dice roll by Ellio, but for some completely legitimate reason, I'm sure, he ended up with seat 1 himself, the very first pick seat, where your choice for first card is especially crucial because it will be ages until it's your turn again because of this snake picking order. Meanwhile, I'm sitting comfortably in seat 7, almost at the very back, which kind of makes it even harder though, because 6 people will make their first pick and lock in their first color before me. So it seems very hard to plan ahead for this draft. And you do need to plan ahead for this format, because you don't want to end up fighting over cards for your archetype with someone else at the table. All the picks are open information. You can see every pick and every deck. So you need to watch closely who's picking which cards and try to anticipate what kinds of archetype everyone is going for to maximize your own chances of steering toward an archetype that is as uncontested as possible. So the way I tried to tackle this impossible task of preparing a strategy for this draft was, of course, spreadsheets. I made a couple of lists. The first thing I thought of was the heroes. Everyone at the table will need exactly 1 hero. So do you pick your hero early? Probably, right? Because if you think about it, there are 8 of us and 18 heroes in total. So almost half of the heroes will be picked. But as you may know, in Altered Limited, many of the heroes are considered weak or even outright unplayable, which would make securing your hero a very high priority pick, right? From what I could tell, I felt that Sigismar, Kojo, and Teja may be called Tier 1 hero picks. These are not only very strong in Limited generally, but they fit almost any strategy, so they're very good early picks. They don't lock you in very much. Meanwhile, Acacia, Athanas, Traced, and Fen I noted as Tier 2 because they're strong, but they lock you into a certain archetype a bit more, which may be a liability if you pick them too early. Now, being a KojoMain, naturally I was dying to get the chance to represent my boy in this event, but honestly, I figured with us in seat 7, all of these 3 tier 1 heroes would already be gone before it was our first pick. And once they're not an option anymore, locking in your hero right at the start is probably not worth it. So I was thinking probably not go for heroes as your pick 1. So the next thing I thought of was what kinds of non-hero cards would make good early picks in general. Something like a Moth Lantern is surely a strong card, but it signals very clearly to your opponents what kind of strategy you're going for, and you're immediately locked into that archetype even if one of the other players should decide to contest it. So, bad idea. What we want is instead flexible picks, very generalist cards that are good in any archetype, cards that will be highly contested but which don't lock us into one strategy yet. So the list I came up with looked something like this, sorted from most generalist at the top to powerful but kind of specific at the bottom. Obviously this isn't a complete list, this is just what I could come up with while strategizing. And as you can see, Daring Porter takes the top spot on this list, one of my favorite cards from Trial by Frost and a card that perfectly fits this description of high power, incredibly solid, never underperforms, can be used in many different archetypes, etc. And it's interesting because that's not really the first card you would think of if you think of first pick material in a draft, right? But then again, maybe it is. Frozen Delivery, Soul, and Floral Tent are all cards that basically do nothing. They just pass the turn back to your opponent for very cheap, which is incredibly powerful in Altered, so these also fit the requirement. And then you start to get more specialized cards from the Bravos Fleeting archetype, which I really like, and Icebound Taiga, and so on. These are all not 100% flexible, but they seemed powerful enough to warrant consideration as an early pick. Another cool thing to consider about the rules of this draft, you don't have a limit on rare slots. Not only can you potentially make a deck of just rares, which by the way almost happened for one of the players actually, but also there are a couple of cards with really cool rare versions that you never get to play, because the common version is good enough. So you always end up just playing the common and saving the rare slots for something else. Examples of this include Hooked, Magical Training, and Physical Training, among many others I'm sure, but these were the ones that I could think of, so these cards were on my mind as well to potentially secure if I got the chance, although I'm not sure they're first pick material. So at this point, are we looking to grab the top spot on my tier list, Daring Porter, as our first pick? Kind of. But there's one more aspect to this that needs to be considered, and it's very important. If we pick Daring Porter, say the Izmir rare version, as our pick 1, we instantly lock in Izmir. Do we want that? I don't know, it's hard to say, but if you pick your colors carelessly, you'll end up in a color combination that doesn't have much potential for synergy. So I also made some lists of possible archetypes you could end up playing, and which colors can best support them. One of the first ideas I came up with was to maybe play Sierra Permanence, the archetype that I just made a video about and which I really like. And that would well be supported by Axiom and Izmir primarily. So it's still very much on the table after you lock in Daring Porter as your first pick. On the other hand, there are many other archetypes I was considering, like Rin Forests, or Gulrang, or Teja Midrange, that don't get support from Axiom and Izmir very well. So picking an Axiom or Izmir card as your pick 1 basically locks you out of these archetypes immediately. That's what makes your pick 1 so hard. No matter what you pick, a big chunk of the possible decks you could have gone for will instantly go out of the window. Afanas was another deck idea that I was thinking about because I had experience playing a multicolor version of Afanas because of my doubles videos. Check them out if you haven't. Playing a big ramp deck also sounded really cool. And that one would probably be centered most around Bravos and Muna, so it's another example for a cool deck that we could lock ourselves out of by picking Daring Porter first. So as you can see, there's no perfect answer, and we don't even know what cards will still be available when it's our turn. But in the end I felt that going with a versatile Axiom card would probably be the best bet for me. Yes, it might lock us out of some of the cool archetypes, but then again, if the card is generic enough, maybe not so much. And besides, Axiom is strongly supporting 3 of the archetypes that I was most looking to play: Sierra Permanence, Bravos Fleeting Aggro, and Acacia Zigzag. Going for a Bravos ramp deck is also kind of still on the table afterward, and maybe even something like Gulrang or Afanas with Axiom as a small third color. So in the end, I prepared Axiom Daring Porter as well as the Axiom Frozen Delivery common card as my options for the first pick. After that, everything really depends on what the other players are going for, but this way I can pick something strong while still keeping my options open as well as possible. So, with all that planning and strategizing out of the way, it's time for the actual draft. Let's see what everyone felt was important enough to warrant first round picking it. As I said, for this draft, Ellio is in seating position 1, and as you probably know, he's a really good player, regularly in the top regions of the online leaderboards and a very creative deck builder. So obviously he goes with an incredibly stunning, unexpected, just kidding, he picks Haven, which is reasonable. Axiom Haven is banned in this event, as per the official ban list, and common Bravos Haven doesn't resupply, so this is the only chance to get your hands on the single copy of actual Haven in this card pool. No questions asked about that decision. It was probably on many people's lists, and honestly, even if it's boring, I would probably have picked it too. Now, second in pick order is Kohlrabi. You've probably heard of him too. He's the man behind Altered Corner, and he came up with a pick that completely went under my radar, Small Step Giant Leap. It's ironic because he said he was mainly picking it to make sure nobody else got it. But by doing so, he's secured an incredibly powerful weapon for himself that not only is widely played competitively, and by now it's actually on the watch list for being a card that's possibly too strong, but it's also a tried and true limited staple. And he even gets the rare version, which can progress twice because it's not fleeting. So overall, it's an amazing first pick. On position 3 sits Pratt. He's a friend of Ellio's who decided to cut the pretense and, quote, become the bad guy of the draft by locking in Sigismar. Obviously, very solid pick. Probably the overall best hero in Limited, and a card you can't go wrong first picking. As I said earlier, I was expecting someone to snatch Sigismar right away, and it's easy to see why. Now the turn passes to Blue in seating position 4. He's another fellow altered YouTuber who supposedly likes to troll people. And we were told to expect shenanigans from him in this draft. I guess those rumors were not exaggerated because he decided to throw subtlety out of the window and immediately go with what's definitely the spiciest pick in this draft so far, Lyra Festival. In the Lyra version, immediately making clear the kind of game we're getting ourselves into in this draft. And this actually turned out to be a very clever mind game, because for the next couple of rounds, none of us could really tell if he was actually going for a full-on festival strat, or if he would pivot into something else. So we were all a bit anxious about having or not having to pick permanent removal right away. So looking back, this pick may go against my strategy of keeping your options open for longer, but it definitely had a destabilizing effect on the opponents. So well picked. Next up is Victor, or Vittorio. He's another very strong competitive player who's locking in Afanas and Senka right away. Definitely a first pick I was expecting as well. I mean, who can blame him? This is one of the most competitive heroes. Half of the ban watch list is for Afanas, so go figure. And even if you can only play each card once in this format, as opposed to 3 times in Standard, you can still make Afanas happen by picking his archetypes cards from both Izmir and the out-of-faction versions, like Muna Beauty Sleep. So I was expecting this archetype to be very strong, and as I mentioned earlier, I had considered going for it as well. But as expected, it was snatched up right away in the first round, so no chance for us. Now on the bright side, this crosses off one of the non-Axiom archetypes from my list. So going for an Axiom card as our first pick is even less restrictive now. Position 6 at the table is Kelon Guy, who apparently got into Altered via some of Ellio's and my earlier videos, which is really sweet, but then he became a fully fledged competitive player. He won the first place in Season 1 of the Altered Weekly Online League, and he now has his own YouTube channel. They grow up so fast, guys. For his pick, he decided to grab the second Izmir Small Step. Very solid pick, even if it's just the common. And now we have 2 people at the table who can just end the game as soon as they reach match point. Very dangerous drafting here right out of the gate. Now it's finally time for our first pick, and I was quite anxious because these previous first picks were not really what I had anticipated. I had expected more heroes, But still I went through with my plan and picked the rare Daring Porter. And then my confidence was shaken even more because Ellio immediately proceeded to publicly call this the most surprising pick so far. And you know, if a really good player calls your strat surprising, it's normally not a good sign. But hey, we've got a plan. And a big part of that plan is instantly ruined because sitting right behind us in seat 8 is Freeloader, who's another decorated competitive player known for having achieved the only high-profile tournament placement with an Aurak deck in Beyond the Gates. And being in the seat 8 position, he now gets to pick 2 cards before the pick order goes backward towards seat 1. So he uses the opportunity to snatch both the rare Bravos Mighty Djinn as well as the Tiny Djinn. What a smart double pick for him there. That immediately crushes any hope for any of the other players to go for a ramp strat, me included, and thereby it means that that archetype will be uncontested for him. So I think that was an incredibly smart decision. Now, being on the pick again for my second card, because we're in position 7, I had a difficult decision to make, because the second Daring Porter, the Izmir one, is right there for me to pick up, but that would mean locking us into Izmir, which not 1, not 2, but 3 other players have also already gone into. It's simply too contested to commit to right out of the gate. And that is a big problem, because as you recall from my planning, almost all of the big archetypes I had planned for include Izmir. I was very worried that our plans might already be in shambles simply because so many players went for Izmir here. So I picked up the rare Hooked from Axiom, one of the cards on my list of underplayed cool rares, because with these 2 picks, we're still very open and we haven't committed to any other color yet. Now, the lads in chat, that is to say the other players, they really liked this Hooked pick. That's one of the cool things about this Rotisserie format. It's all open information. So it's perfect for having lots of banter between the players while the draft is unfolding. It's not like in a normal draft where everyone sits silently around the table staring at their packs and then passing them around without a word. Instead, it's very social. And even just the draft itself is already a great time with friends. In round 3, we were starting to get some information about where each player was headed. Ellio was seemingly staying in a versatile Bravos shell so far, going for a similar strategy as us and securing the 2 Havensay Ringars for himself, one of the trendiest and strongest new cards. Kohlrabi's picks were a shocker, because after snatching rare Small Step Giant Leap as his first pick, he pivoted into Basira as his hero, signaling an aggressive Bravos archetype, which honestly is one of the scariest shells to put Small Step Giant Leap in. You can get ahead early, and you can close out the game prematurely, a very potent combo. We also see Pratt, with his Sigismar start, pick up Izmir as a second color. That's a 4th person in Izmir already, which is terrible news for us. And finally, Kilon Guy, with his Small Step Giant Leap common and Off You Go start, now signals he might actually go for the incredible Lindiv limited deck by picking up Baba's Isba, putting him clearly into a sacrifice archetype. With all of these developments, the next pick was incredibly difficult for me. I wanted to commit to either Axiom and Izmir led by Akisha or Sierra, or pivot into Bravos. But both Bravos and Izmir were so heavily contested that I didn't feel it was safe. Muna, still completely untouched, didn't feel very synergistic with what I had from Axiom so far, and Ordis was also not exactly uncontested around the table. So I felt I still didn't have enough information, and I needed to play it safe one more round, again picking general purpose Axiom cards until I had more information about which colors everyone was playing. So I picked Frozen Delivery, the common version instead of the rare, as this is, at least in my view, one of the rare cases where the common is actually legitimately better than the rare, and I think the play rates in Constructed agree with that. Right afterward, we saw Freeloader locking Lyra in with Fen. And I thought about what other Axiom cards were versatile enough to be good picks here without committing to anything. I ended up with Arcolano Milk. Yes, it's kind of meant for a certain archetype, but at the end of the day, it's a 1 mana after you. And it potentially disencourages Ellio and Kohlrabi to go into the Bravos fleeting archetype, which I was still hoping to somehow secure for myself. Keep in mind that Icebound Peak has an out of faction in Axiom, which we could make use of. During the rest of round 4, I'm thinking whether I need to pick my hero now. Surprisingly, many good in limited heroes are still available. And then Kohlrabi reveals that he's going for Muna as his third color, and Ellio immediately pivots that way as well. No doubt because Muna is still being uncontested, and so it looked very attractive for both of these guys' decks. Then in the 5th round, Victor does the same, as expected in his case, as he's going for the Izmir/Muna Afanas we were talking about. From what everyone has at this point, it feels like nobody will contest Axiom yet, including the Axiom heroes. But Kojo and Buddha might be contested by Ellio as an alternative to Teja, and by Kilon with his sacrifice deck to provide sacrifice fodder. So if I want to contest Bravos, I should do it sooner rather than later, and ideally by picking Kojo and one generally good card from Bravos that Ellio and Kohlrabi might be looking to pick up. So at first I settled on picking Kojo and Mana Eruption, but Freeloader, who's sitting right behind me in the pick order, is also in Bravos, and he has already picked his hero. So the safer order would be Mana Eruption and then Kojo. There are multiple alternatives for the non-hero card to pick though, like the Bravos Rare Arcolano Milk, the Bravos Tracer, Icebound Peak, and many others. Normally, I value Mana Eruption very highly, but in the end I picked Rare Bravos Arcolano Milk because it's just so good with Buddha, followed by Kojo and Buddha to lock in our Axiom/Bravos aggro archetype. In the meantime, Freeloader has revealed he's joining me in Axiom with two very pog picks, Rare Axiom Salvager and Rare Kilon Cylinder, which is a really cool choice, and he was highly praised in the Discord when it happened. So now our Axiom card pool is no longer uncontested. So while the turn goes back across the table and we wait for our 7th and 8th picks, I'm not really thinking about my third color as much as what cards of Axiom and Bravos are the most contested right now because I need to secure them quickly. One card very high on that list because it's so generally playable is definitely the rare Axiom Foundry Armorer. It's very solid, but it's especially broken with our Colano Milk, so we should definitely try to secure it as soon as possible. Meanwhile, Victor is continuing with his Izmir Muna Afanas. Pratt and Kilon are still in their Ordis Izmir shells with generally good picks. Blue is looking to pivot away from Libra Festival into Waru Bureaucrats, which is a really nice combination because there's so much sleeping going around for the festival. And Ellio has locked in his third color as Lyra, with Seiringar and Aloe Vera, securing the additional copies of those cards for himself, so now he has the foundation for an insane value pile brewing. Myself, I made a list at this point of all the Axiom and Bravos cards I might be looking to get, trying to rank them in terms of how likely they were to be picked by these other players. And there was so much I ended up wanting to prioritize, but for now I can only pick 2 things. Actually, only one as far as outpicking Freeloader is concerned. So I went with the Foundry Armorer, because that's the kind of value Axiom card he had been picking, but it's also very strong with our milk, so I was planning to take the third copy of Arcolano Milk afterward and completely commit to the Arcolano Milk strat. For the next round, there weren't really any surprises, so by the time it was my turn again, the situation was more or less unchanged. We basically want to secure highly contested Bravos and Axiom cards, so I went with Mana Eruption first, and I was sad to see that Freeloader took the opportunity to snatch Rare Axiom Avalanche. That's one of the cards I had my eye on as well, it's very strong. And then he also took Ordis Spy, which would have been really sick with my milks. So this was pretty painful. I was definitely right to assume that he'd be my primary opponent in this phase of the draft. He's definitely been outpicking me, and from what I can tell, I've been outpicking him too, so it's all fair. While we were fighting over Axiom and Bravos, Victor is continuing with his competitive level Afanas and Senka deck, and Blue, who was on Waru Bureaucrats but so far without Waru, because he's not in any rush to secure him, obviously nobody else is going to pick Waru, now surprisingly locks in Muna as his third color with Muna Caregiver. A very surprising pick, but it fits well into the Pocket Lyra Festival strat that he still has going. Right afterward, Pratt, with his so far Izmir Ordis good stuff pile led by Sigismar, goes for Axiom as his third color, probably since Axiom is still relatively underpicked in this draft with only 2 people making use of it, but for us that means yet another player who might snatch our picks. With Pratt now in Axiom as well, the pressure is even greater to secure the cards I need before someone else does. I think the common Hooked is something people might be looking to pick up as it fits well into basically any deck. And for the second pick, I would have to see what Freeloader goes for, but I was having my eyes on Axiom Sticky Note Seals to have something against the festival. or maybe the Axiom out of faction Bravos Tracer. So I get hooked first, and Freeloader takes Rare Physical Training. That's yet another card from off my list that I was not fast enough for. So now I'm bent on counterpicking this guy, primarily out of spite. But then I realized that with me being seed 7 and him being seed 8, after this second pick now, I will have one more coming back before it's his turn again. So right now, I should rather be picking a Bravos card here, something that the other players 1 to 6 might be looking to grab with their 2 picks before I get to go again. So I go for Common Helping Hand. It's always nice, and it's especially good in milk decks. By now, with 12 out of 30 cards, I'm pretty happy with the direction of our deck. We still need to grab some key pieces like Icebound Peak, but it's working out nicely so far. The big weakness of our deck is that we're still very low on characters to play. So I need to balance our priority tech pieces like Peak or removal spells with our growing need to secure a reasonable number of characters that work well with milk. And there's also the question of potentially going for a third color. I was thinking Muna might be a smart idea, because our milks give our characters boosts, so having anchor effects probably pays off big for us. That's another reason why Rare Bravos Soul is so strong, and it's very high on my priority list right now. It offers such good utility for very cheap, it passes the turn, and it can even anchor from reserve. While we are watching helplessly as 6 players pick 2 cards each, I realize we probably dodged a bullet because Ellio picks up So, but in the Muna version instead of Bravos, which he could have picked as well and which is the exact same card. So we are very lucky here, and I should probably get the Bravos So while I still can. Ellio also secures the second Lyra Festival for himself, which fits very nicely into what he has so far, and it makes his value pile look even scarier. Now, with 2 people running Festival at this table, as well as a Grand Endeavor being picked up by Pratt for his Sigismar deck, I feel it's important to get some additional permanent removal. So I'm getting Axiom Sticky Note Seals before Freeloader has a chance to snatch it, and then after his 2 picks, I'm hoping to get the Bravos So. That plan works out, I managed to get both, and afterward, Ellio told me that basically he had to decide which So to leave open, as he could only pick one, and he decided to leave Bravos open because he was worried about Muna getting snatched, so again, I got pretty lucky there. At this point, Keelon Guy is the last player apart from us who still has only 2 colors, but he breaks that now with an Axiom pick for his Ordis Izmir deck. That's now yet another competitor for Axiom cards, but at this point, I've already got most of the important ones I wanted for my deck. I'm more concerned our colleague Freeloader right behind me may be running out of value picks and might start thinking about something like an Icebound Peak. And given how important that card is for our deck, I need to prioritize it here. With Axiom Inkcaster and Axiom Stargazer, it looks like he's leaning more into the classic Axiom play from reserve side though, which fits very well with his hero Fen, but for me it's a relief since it signals we'll be competing for Axiom cards less in the future. That's why for my next card, I picked up the Bravos Snowman. This was the last high priority card on my list, and I was suspecting Ellio to maybe pick Lyra Snowman and Bravos Snowman next, as had been his style. Indeed, he told me afterward that it was on his mind, so my hunch to secure it here was correct. For our upcoming 2 picks, I'm increasingly thinking about branching off into my third color, because by now we got all the most important picks from Axiom and Bravos, but I'm having a hard time deciding which third color that could be. So I thought I would continue on for a while longer with just the 2 colors I had, going for Bravos Trailblazer in the rare version next, which is a clean upgrade over the common, so I thought Ellio might have it on his list. I also picked up the Bravos Tooth Fairy, already a decent card, but especially decent with milk, and we have a lot of reserve-heavy stuff going around the table, so it looks to be good utility. Over the following round, Ellio ends up picking Haven Bouncer. Looks like he was looking for the Bravos Sabotage cards as well, so I'm glad I nabbed the Tooth Fairy in time. And once I'm up again, I go for the 2 remaining copies of Icebound Peak. They're both pretty low profile, but I was thinking at this point somebody like Freeloader might run out of obvious Axiom picks and could end up taking it. Both of these are not as good as the Bravos Rare, but they're still good enough that we definitely want them. So as I said, for a while at this point, I've been considering my options for our third color. Basically, out of the 4 available options, Lyra and Izmir seem the least attractive. They're both heavily contested in this draft, most of the high-profile cards have already been picked, and the synergy with our archetype seems very weak. Ordis and Muna, though, both offer considerable perks for us. With Ordis, we can make use of cards that create recruit tokens, which is confirmed gigabusted with our Colano Milk, as they all get boosted and you don't care about them getting fleeting, which is also the reason why the Foundry Armorer we picked up is so strong. So a card like Ordis Ratatoskr can not only put an insane amount of power on the board in combination with Milk, it also ends up instantly flipping your Icebound Peak if you so desire. Muna, on the other hand, would be helpful for us because of anchoring, as I mentioned before. Imagine anchoring our 6/6/6 dragon or something like that. Besides, I'm seeing Daughter of Yggdrasil still in the pool, which is just generally a crazy card, even though Trickster argued to the contrary in his recent video, which is kind of interesting. So all in all, both of these colors still seem very worthwhile for us, even with all the picks so far already removed from the card pool in those colors. So for our next pair of picks, we could still stick to Axiom Bravos one more time by picking up the 2 remaining Bravos Tracers, which I want sooner or later. But it's slowly getting to the point where my secret aces from Ordis or Muna, which I had been pondering about for a couple of rounds at this point, might actually get picked. So I'm getting increasingly anxious. And then I decided that this was the point I would commit to Ordis. So I picked Ratatoskr, following it up with Ordis Overseer, which works with Milk in a similar way. There would also have been Ordis Spy, even in Bravos, but it was already taken. The next Ordis cards I'm looking for, out of the pool of those still available, are very niche, and I don't need to be worried about other people picking them. So for the next round, I go back temporarily for the remaining 2 copies of Bravos Tracer. There aren't really any big surprises out of the other players this round, but Ellio is picking up the rare Haven Warrior, which is quite strong, and looking back on it, would have been a nice pickup for us too. It's generally a high-statted character, and it was even played competitively for that reason. At this point in the draft, I once again made a list of what my deck looked like currently in terms of the mana curve and the card type distribution. This is what it roughly looked like. And I realized I didn't have any 1-drop characters yet. Now, that's not generally a problem since we have 1-drop non-characters to open our rounds with, but I figured I would be well advised to take some here, so I opted for Hound. I wanted both the Ordis rare and the Axiom rare, but Freeloader picked the Axiom rare right after me, so I only got 1, and I had to go for the rare Bravos Ratatoskr instead. I guess this is the advantage of sitting in either seed 1 or 8, where you get to pick 2 cards at the same time. In this situation, me picking the Hound gave the other players the idea, so Freeloader can come in and instantly pick the other one. If I had been in his seat, I would have been able to snatch both at the same time, but alas, such is the fate of a seed 7 Andy like me. Anyway, with our 2 1-drops secured, there aren't really any other popular ones left apart from maybe the common Fire Rabbit, and basically, with how low to the ground our mana curve is right now, and with all the fleeting going around, I'm worried that our deck will run out of gas too quickly. Keep in mind that as opposed to normal Bravos aggro, we don't really have any card draw since we're missing the Havensay Ringars. So a couple of higher mana cost bangers probably can't hurt to make our cards more efficient. That being said, I also really would like trying to go for the rare Axiom Machine in the Ice, a pretty underrated card. But at this point, there are only 4 picks left, so I need to be very careful about what I pick. Running out of gas will definitely be the primary problem. And combined with the fact that we don't have expensive cards yet, my idea for solving that problem was to pick Axiom Reprocessor. Definitely a card nobody had on their radar, but I feel like it might be exactly what we need. It's definitely a very unusual pick, but you know, sometimes you have to go for the style pick. Maybe it's the nuts. The last 2 picks are coming up, which for me will be rare Parvati and a cheeky rare Intimidation. Around the table, people are putting the finishing touches on their drafts. Freeloader stays true to his Fen plus Axiom Reserve stuff deck, which looks incredibly strong. Keelon Guy actually commits to Lindiv over Akisha for his Izmir Ordis deck, so that's going to be very exciting to see. Victor is still sitting there with his competitive level Afanas and Senka that went more or less uncontested in this entire draft, so now it's looking incredibly strong. Kohlrabi by now owns the most bizarre mix of aggro plus small step giant leap plus all sorts of other flavors. And Pratt has put together a rock-solid Ordis Izmir value pile around Sigismar that looks like nothing can really go wrong. Blue is trying to make the Lyra Festival dream happen, it seems, with lots of sleep support from Waru bureaucrats. And Ellio at the far end of the table last picks his hero Rin and Orchid to round out his Bravos, Lyra, Muna, Value Pile, Rin strat, which also looks pretty strong. With that, the draft is complete, guys. And as you can see, there are so many very scary decks around this table, exactly as you'd expect from this group of highly decorated competitive players. Actually, between us, it's kind of ludicrous how outmatched I am at this table. But hey, now, we had agreed to play a complete round-robin tournament. That means everyone will go up against every other deck once, playing a total of 7 games. If I count correctly, that means a total of 28 games will be played over the coming weeks, or by the time you see this video, they're probably well underway already. I'll definitely try to keep you all in the loop about everything that happens in this tournament. I can't wait to go over the games with you so that you can see in real time how I'm losing to each of these pros. But hey, we drafted Kojo and Buddha aggro. So the real question is, can we actually lose? See you then.